Hi, I'm Rich Sains, and you're listening to the Procurement Conversations Big Conversation. Join me as I talk to procurement leaders and industry specialists about the biggest issues facing our profession. Welcome to the Procurement Conversation. To avoid being disrupted by competitors, business is moving faster than ever, but procurement is taking longer as it tries to mitigate an endless list of risks. The gap is widening, and many feel procurement is too slow. Is moving too slowly the biggest issue we face? And how can we get procurement to do the right thing more quickly? This week, we're looking at how procurement can move fast and then faster. I'm talking to Tim Snow, who's CPO at Inmarsat.
Hello, Rich. Thanks very much for having me.
So, Tim, how important is it for procurement to just get stuff done?
I think it's really important that procurement have a reputation of getting things done. But the reputation is for getting things done with quality, with pace, and with rounded commercial thinking, rather than just running a process to get to an outcome. The CPOs that I've worked with have always expected me and my team together to get things done and deliver outcomes which we would be measured against. But they've always been equally important, equally valued how we would do it, so that we do it in a very collaborative, partnership way by getting involved right up front in the thinking and the strategy so that we know what's coming, and then we can deliver an effective and efficient commercial procurement strategy as a result. And I've often thought failure is when someone turns up with an email saying, I have defined a requirement and I want to go out to these suppliers in this timeline and deliver the outcome. You're holding me up. You're going slow. More fool us for not building those stakeholder relationships up front, leveraging finance, legal, the different business functions, etc., so that you can get involved up front. And that requires some passion and enthusiasm and commitment and drive and a team of people who are known, respected, and want to make that kind of thing happen. So I think, to answer your question, I think it's really important that procurement do get stuff done, but how they do it and when they do it is really important.
Why do you think procurement has a reputation for moving slowly in some areas?
It's interesting you say that, actually, because the procurement teams I've generally led haven't had that reputation.
No.
Now, there's always exceptions to that. And I think why that is I've always hired a group of positive, passionate, energetic, can-do go-getters from a variety of backgrounds, a variety of ages. None of that matters. It's about the passion and drive to get things done. That's the first thing. Second thing, I don't necessarily agree with the statement, is with a mandate from the CFO and the CFO getting you involved by invite into things and leveraging his or her relationships so that you can get ahead of the curve and you can get involved in developing strategy, not because your bosses told everyone that they have to work with you, but because they want to, that he or she's merely opened doors. I think you can get involved up front. So there's always going to be people who say, I don't want to run a process. I've selected a supplier. I know what I want and I know the best way of doing it. But often when you unwrap that, they might not. And there might be a better way, particularly when you have to consider some of the mandatory things, such as any compliance or regulatory side of things, any legal stuff, the fact they might want to own some intellectual property or something, which they won't have thought of. They'll have just thought of getting definition of what it is they want, getting a certain price, and then we'll worry about the rest later. I think it's those things, those foundations are really important to put in place. And as a CPO, I am accountable for doing that for my team. The buck stops with me. And where I've led transformations to move from slowly to an accelerated pace, it's the mandate, but more importantly, the people and the right culture that I create and that the team develops and moves on that makes the big difference. You never end up in that place.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. I think you do see that different people like to work in different ways. And actually, there are some professionals that are more reliant on the process and they more use that as an excuse for taking time on things. And actually, there's others who just want to get the right outcome for everyone and work quickly to that outcome. So yeah. I totally see that. How do you define agility within the context of procurement and why do you think it's important to prioritize it?
Agility. So for me, this is about coming up with the right commercial solution for whatever it is you're trying to achieve and truly understanding what it is you're trying to achieve. So, for example, if you were working for a company that actually has a market that's diminishing and the competitors are overtaking you, Maybe you need to come up with a commercial solution that allows you to source a supplier super fast, because of the bigger picture is the revenue profit that you're going to lose by that a procurement process might take too long to achieve. I think agility is defining the right commercial solution for the right situation that the company's in and the stakeholders you're working with are trying to achieve. So there's time and a place for each. Sometimes you have to also not be afraid to load up these projects with as many procurement resources as are needed and divide those responsibilities to run multiple things in tandem. So
Yeah.
if you've got regulatory stuff, we'll run that at the same time as maybe a tender, if that's right, or a single source negotiation, if that's right, at the same time as doing sustainability stuff and ESG stuff, at the same time as a contract negotiation. I sometimes wonder whether we put all the accountability for driving a really efficient, effective procurement to one person, and that makes a long process, when actually a
Yeah.
team approach and dividing things up at times can be a much more efficient way of working, particularly if you've done some pre-screening on the company. So you know already they're financially stable and they can comply with regulatory and all that great stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, that's totally right. You do get this whole thing of context switching. So if you're talking like negotiation, relationship building, and then suddenly you've got to do some deeply analytical work, actually that can throw you out of your, take you out of your flow, which sort of makes things a bit slower. But yeah, I think that batch approach definitely works. And actually, if something is priority number one for the organization, you do need to be showing that from a resourcing point of view and putting as many people on as needed, because you want to realize those benefits as early as possible of that approach.
Yeah. So I think, just to reiterate, agility is about the right solution for the right task at the right time with the right people and skill set to be as efficient as possible, and not be afraid in a balanced risk way to cut corners if you need to. So what if there's a 6-step process and you miss out steps 3 and 4, when actually that will unlock 20 million of extra revenue and margin or something? Yeah. Don't be afraid to do that, but you need to understand it and make a positive decision and make sure everyone's behind that decision.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And how do you balance the need for speed and agility with compliance, risk management, and vendor relationships?
If one has defined the team and the company's approach to risk management, and you're not building it from scratch, it's a lot easier to think about these things up front fast and make balanced decisions in a cross-functional team way, as opposed to having to build it every time. So I suppose to be agile, you need the foundations of procurement to be in place, understood, people trained on it, seniors available to make fast decisions and act in a kind of lean kind of way and use those tools which are around. And I'm a real fan of getting those basics right. And I think that really helps because you understand what the guardrails are around it. And don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to discount suppliers really nice and early. If there's a company that's not financially stable, has no hope of being financially stable, is burning so much cash, they can only be around for 6 months without refinancing, which may or may not happen. And you can make those judgments nice and early on if you use the tools you've got to ask the right questions, engage the right people to make a rounded decision. Something as simple, Rich, as financial due diligence. We do financial due diligence within my Empower team, but there's nothing wrong about getting a finance VP to come into the room and ask a whole load of questions to a CFO at the supplier early on so that you understand what you're going into. So I think it's about making sure you've got the right tool set there that people can use, and then they do actually use it, and management are available to make lean and effective, fast decisions.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. If you get the right people in at the right point of the process, asking the right questions, then actually that can cut through a lot of the wasted time. I saw something the other day where someone was looking to outsource a service. They got a year down the line and then they took it to the board, and the board, we don't outsource that type of service. And you wasted a whole year on something. So if you'd have had that conversation at the beginning, then you wouldn't have wasted that much time. So it's a great approach there.
And I think if you've got the strong relationships as a CFO or a senior leader, and leadership comes from every chair, right? But, as a senior leader, so that you can walk down the corridor, or metaphorically so, and speak to the CFO, you speak to the kind of the technology director, you speak to, or bring them all together to make a rounded decision on the bigger or more critical or more risky procurements, That's what we should do. That's the role of the CFO, to bring together quick decisions, to agree the strategy that you're going to follow so that the teams can then execute the strategy. Don't get me wrong. This does not mean a CPO needs to get involved in everything all the time. That would be disempowering to the team. That's not my point. There's a time and a place for this where things need to get done super agilely for really important business reasons, not just cost, the kind of business strategy.
Definitely. Have you got some good examples of where your teams sped up a process or a project or something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. A really good, a recent example is where we were trying to buy some new satellites with new technology. This is an extreme purchase for Inmarsat. We only buy so many satellites so often, right? New technology. We had established players, big brands who were able to do it, but were probably cost prohibitive. And we did some research just to test that hypothesis. Therefore, how could we develop a market where there were new entrants who could build these satellites at more faster, cheaper, with a required level of quality so they stay in space for at least 15 years. So we started down the route of going out to request for information, a useful tool, not the answer, a useful tool to gather information. We then found out there were limited suppliers, as few as a couple. We did some really good due diligence on those companies to make sure we were strong, we were efficient, and we knew that they would be around for the medium to long term when we needed them. And then quite quickly, we realized there was only one of them that we rationalized right down to and came up with a commercial strategy to negotiate a win deal with that supplier, let alone some external funding from some agency bodies. So we could have just kept going with an RFP with tried and tested suppliers who would have come in with a ridiculous cost that we knew we wouldn't be able to afford, or we could develop a new market, do due diligence, and find a solution which was more likely to be successful. And that's what we did. And they are building some pretty cool technology now, which will enable a customer solution that will drive revenue and profitability.
It's brilliant. Yeah, there seems to be a lot more agility in the space industry at the moment. It is one of the things I've noticed. That it used to be very slow and cumbersome and take sort of 10, 15, 20 years to develop things. And it seems to be a lot more agile, a lot quicker now.
Technology is caught up. You can do things a lot quicker with super clever people, much cleverer than me, who can come up with a whole range of options that you have available to you at a price or value kind of decision point.
Are there some popular misconceptions around the RFP process, would you say?
There's something about the RFP, request for proposal, that seems to be negative. At the end of the day, it's a bit like if you were building a house, you'd write down a specification, or your architect would, for that builders then quote against, and you'd compare those quotes, or your architect would, and then you'd make a decision on a balanced basis which builder to choose. But at some point, you need to write down what it is. Otherwise, the builder's going to come in and it's going to be expensive, and the price could be anywhere, possible. The same applies at work. So you need a document to write down what it is you want or need, and with the opportunities for bidders to tell you wrong and there's a better way. An RFP is a useful mechanism to get all your stakeholders to align on one set of requirements that you can then use to go out to the market and then adjudicate fairly to get all your stakeholders on the same page, and then to allow you to negotiate an effective deal, an effective contract, effective longevity to it, and put in place supplier relationship management and all that great stuff too. I'm a real fan of an RFP, but call it whatever you like. If you're in the marketing world, call it a pitch. Don't call it an RFP, because it doesn't mean something to the agencies. Call it something else if you really want to, but it needs to be written down at some point, or you only, in my opinion, end up with a failed procurement with not aligned people and cost creep after you've signed the contract.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think maybe it's got a bit of a bad rep because it's a sort of an acronym. It's a little bit exclusive. As you say, if you're in marketing, you might not understand what an RFP means as a concept. As a supplier, obviously, you probably have to respond to quite a few, and sometimes they are poorly written. Sometimes they're sent out for people to make up the numbers or to drive leverage on an incumbent. So they've maybe been misused a little bit over time. But yeah, as you say, that it's an effective way of getting everyone on the same page. And actually, the thing for me has always been you learn a fantastic amount about the marketplace going through that RFP process, which you wouldn't otherwise unless you came up with some slightly different process.
Procurement professionals we have a moral duty to be fair and equitable,
Mm.
etc. We should never be sending, I know you weren't suggesting this, but just as a point, we should be never sending out
No, no.
RFPs to make up the numbers. That's, in my opinion, that's just immoral. Suppliers
Mm.
will see through it. You lose credibility, and you lose sometimes credibility with the ones who do want to bid against it. Come
Yeah.
up with a different commercial solution that kind of, if there's only one kid in town who can do the job for you, come to a win situation. Do your due diligence to make sure they're making a fair margin, but not too much margin. Make sure
Mm.
they're going to be around, all that kind of stuff. But don't run an RFP just for the sake of it. I know you weren't suggesting that.
No, I wasn't suggesting you would. No, no.
Headline.
But yeah, you do see it and you do hear people talking about it, and I have seen it in the past. And yeah, it's not a good approach.
Yeah.
What are some of the common bottlenecks that slow down procurement, and how do you recommend addressing this?
I think there's a few answers to that. One of the bottlenecks could be resource and skilled resource.
Hmm.
As a CPO, I'm not afraid to bring in skilled resource, being mindful not to take over from the existing team, being mindful not to leave the existing team with the boring stuff or not the exciting stuff. But if you need a specific skill set for a finite period of time, go and hire it on a temporary basis and bring it in to remove bottlenecks. And I think it's prudent for a CPO to allow a little bit of budget to allow that to happen, or at least on the projects, make sure that there is budget defined in the projects to enable that to happen. So I think that removes potentially one of the bottlenecks. I think the second bottleneck is making sure you're using the tools that you've got, or invest in them if you don't, to avoid surprises. So I don't think there's any excuse in this modern day and age for having contracts that surprisingly expire. We have a contract management lifecycle database called Contract Pod that we use to foresee what contracts are coming up. And we define by contract when we should look at a renewal. So typically we set it at 9 months before the contract renews. But for some of the big material ones, it's a lot earlier because you need to work out the strategy, what you're going to do, and have time to, then you can run the procurement. And then you need to allow time for any change that happens as well. Signing the contract's not the end of it, it's the beginning of it, really. So I think second bottleneck is, that you need to avoid is those surprises, but you don't need to have these surprises in this day and age if you're willing to invest time and effort in using the right tools that are available to you and making sure that only certain people can sign contracts. So you don't have people out there in the business signing them infinitum that you just don't know about. So you need some kind of control and mandate there. And then I think third bottleneck possibly would be spending, too much time on some of the due diligence that actually you can just do up front if you really think about it by running tasks in parallel. And I'm a real fan of running tasks in parallel as far as possible, using multiple resources as far as possible, rather than a long linear process that means you can have a long time before you get to contract. There's a time and a place for everything, right? There's no right or wrong, different companies, different rules, let alone procurement regulations versus no procurement regulations. So you have to be conscious, but avoid those bottlenecks by just thinking a bit differently. And actually, the final bottleneck, Rich, is probably not taking on everything. Procurement don't need to control everything. If there's someone in the business who's a better negotiator on a very specific subject matter that you're not, and there's plenty of those in the space industry where there have been people who have been around for decades who know people at certain suppliers and therefore can get better deals. Don't be afraid to empower them to do that. You just need to agree the approach up front and the best person to do the task. We're not precious about it if it drives the best benefit for the company. We just need to think what that best benefit is.
Yeah. And I think in this new less siloed way of working, I think procurement doesn't need to, as you say, doesn't need to own everything, have control over everything. It can influence. And as you say, it's having the right players on the team to do the job and the best result for the organization.
Yeah. And you know what? Sometimes suppliers can be perceived as being bottlenecks in procurements. Yeah. But often that's because you haven't spoken to the supplier up front to say, we're thinking about running it in this timeline. This is what we're trying to achieve as an outcome. Are you up for it? Are your resource available? Because if they're maxed out on other bids, or the most important person to do the task is on a 3-week holiday or something, by default, you've got delays built into the process. So really effective and efficient planning internally, really important. And in addition, think around the governance. What am I empowered to sign? What's the business case process? You have to really project plan procurements really carefully to be efficient. The RFP is the easy bit, in my opinion. It's everything around it that gets really complicated because you're using such a cross-functional group of people who also have their own priorities at any point in time. You just need to be conscious of it. So really efficient, effective project planning gets you to a better place.
Yeah, and that the communication, I think there was the other point, wasn't it? Making sure you're communicating with stakeholders, with suppliers, giving everyone as much notice as you can that you're going to be doing something. Otherwise no one's ready. And actually, as well with suppliers, it turns them off if they're suddenly approached about something last minute. They feel that's another one where, am I there to make up the numbers? Because they've not really engaged me. We haven't had a conversation. They don't really know much about my organization, and therefore, are they actually taking me seriously? So it's a great.
You and I probably don't like to be involved late. Why should a supplier be any differently? Yeah.
Mm. Yeah. How would you say procurement leaders could foster a culture of innovation and continuous improvement within their teams?
Encourage people in the teams to get out there. So just because you're not running a procurement on something doesn't mean you shouldn't be out there listening and learning from others. That's how we grow. So listening and learning could be through colleagues at other organizations within the bounds of confidentiality, of course. It could be going and talking and listening to suppliers generally in your world. Could be investing time in finding out about new market entrants or rules and regulations that might open up something you haven't thought of before, or going to a conference or listening to podcasts or even doing podcasts. I think it's really important to encourage people to invest time in being inquisitive, being curious. And that's, I think, a real key behavior. Secondly, I think as a CPO, whilst you can encourage people to do that, you should create an environment where perhaps there's a growing learning and development program. So here at Inmarsat, we have something called Learn and something called Grow. Learning is where we invite internal and external people, nothing to do with procurement, to our team meetings every month, and they share something really interesting about the company or in the supplier marketplace so that we can join up the dots and we can be better at our jobs. And then we have a Grow program, which is about either personal growth and skills and behaviors that are relevant to you that you need to grow and develop and build on the strengths that you have, or it could be team development. So that could be ongoing negotiation training, project planning, I mentioned earlier, really important in my mind, training, legal understanding in certain topic training, whatever the training is, skills, and then training on behaviors, the soft skills, which in my opinion make the difference between a great procurement function and an epic one. So I think that's kind of part of my role, but also creating an environment where people want that. They thrive on it. They have a thirst for it. So it goes both ways.
Fully agree with the soft skills. I think they really multiply everything that we do. The more, to the extent you can be more effective in your soft skills, then definitely you can be more effective as a procurement person. How have you seen strategic partnerships and sort of collaborations with suppliers help to contribute to faster and more effective business outcomes?
You need to pick, first of all, what is it you're trying to achieve? So there's a time and a place for a strategic partnership where you look to consolidate, leverage, use their knowledge, drive kind of business benefits through. But that's dependent on a business strategy and a procurement strategy, and then executing on it and managing that supplier under a supplier relationship management program. So there's open and honest, transparent communication about the priorities, acknowledging all the things that are going well and recognizing that. Who doesn't like being recognized for achieving stuff? Suppliers are no different, right? Specific personnel in suppliers are no different. Saying thank you in front of their management goes a long way. So recognition, but also internally. So I think you need to, strategic partners, there's a time and a place for it. Am I going to have a strategic partnership with a mobile phone company where actually I just need to buy a cheap contract that's with pooled data? No. Am I going to have one with a kind of interconnect capability globally that allows us to get our data from our satellites into a ground network and to customers even faster and more reliably? Yes. You pick and choose where you apply that, I think. And having that really clear thought process about where that's important, joined up with the business, is time very well spent. And we've achieved that in some IT, for example, where we had an IT strategy, where we had certain things to achieve. We developed a procurement strategy, which actually was to try and consolidate and leverage 60, 70% of the Inmarsat estate into one provider. And then we've seen the value coming out of that. As soon as you lose trust, though, because there's a perception that we don't believe them or they don't believe us, it can break down. So it's really important to invest in supplier relationship management and have senior people involved who can make decisions to keep that strategic partnership alive.
We want to think we've got these strategic partnerships, but actually they are more tactical, or we see them as more strategic than the supplier does. And I think you've got to have that joined up mutual intent to create that strategic partnership. Otherwise, it's just a fancy name for another supplier, isn't it?
Yeah. And actually, you raise a really good point. I thought we had a strategic partnership in a certain field. I won't go into details. It's not relevant and confidential. But I thought we had. But there were just some little signs that maybe the supplier didn't. So we did a really simple 7-question survey, really profound questions. And then we looked at what the results were. And basically, we thought the relationship was much more positive than the supplier did, the simple outcome. So we decided we'll keep doing those surveys over a year, every quarter, and we'll take some actions out of the differentiation between what we thought the relationship was like and what they did. So we took some actions to level it up, and we delivered those actions. And there's no doubt we're in a much better place. Nothing's ever perfect. It's unrealistic, right? But it is certainly much better. That simple tool, simple action, designed it in-house, used Excel to do it, and we've leveled things up. Now we just need to keep going with that leveled up relationship and avoid slipping into the past where perhaps we didn't quite get it right.
And how do you measure the success and impact of your initiatives beyond just simple cost savings? Are there any metrics or KPIs you find valuable for evaluating how agile, efficient that you are?
Sure. The easiest one to do is talking and listening to, this is a little bit glib, but talking and listening to senior leaders, because it's a bit like Father Christmas. You either believe or you don't. And so it's a bit, senior leaders need to believe in you, not as a person, although to an extent, yeah, but as a team. They believe you add value. The metrics are really just enforcement points that you're delivering value that can drive bonuses and other kind of things. So keeping that relationship strong, we do that through quarterly business reviews with our stakeholders. We do that through regular communication, making an effort to walk the floors of the office when we're in, to bump into people and join up stuff. But other than that, we have roughly 4 metrics across the team. One of them is cost savings. It's not the first one, actually. One of them is, the first one is strategic change. And that's a metric where we track, are we driving strategic change in our company and in our supplier base? And then we have some metrics that kind of relate to that. Second one is, do we have supply chain certainty and sustainability? So no good having a tier 1 supplier that doesn't have any tier 2 or 3 suppliers to support them. You need to do your due diligence on the end-to-end supply chain, because that's how you improve. And along with that, financial due diligence, and we look at geographical areas of the world where there's tensions, which we need to consider in our kind of sourcing. Cost savings kind of is number 3, so it's a long way down. I almost think cost savings are a hygiene factor these days. Every function should just deliver cost savings, but in a balanced, measured way, and cost avoidance too. Would I rather save tuppence on a cost reduction, or would I rather avoid 50 million of costs coming in? The cost avoidance is a little bit fluffy, but it's better to avoid that 50 million, I would suggest. Yeah. And then the fourth area is people. So do we have happy, content, growing, developed, promoted people? And then we use scores. We use a mechanism called Peakon to track that. The goal is to be more than 8 out of 10 or 80%. And in the early days, maybe we weren't. And we invested in some kind of change to get to a place where we definitely are and have been more recently. So 4 balanced measures that then flows through to our strategy, that flows through to our objectives, that flows through to our bonus. And we talk openly about this and report this to our board through a monthly reporting pack.
That sounds like an amazing approach, actually, that I think a lot of teams could take note of that having those very varied KPIs across multiple strategy pillars is, it's a great way of working. The danger with KPIs is often that you focus too heavily on the KPIs. So as you say, cost savings, you could be 100% focused on cost savings, but you're not avoiding any cost for next year. And then suddenly, I guess it gives you a problem to go after next year, but you're not mitigating those risks of increases. They can have unintended consequences.
These things actually change over time, right?
Mm.
So often when one sets up a procurement function, it's all about looking at the cost and taking cost out. And that might prove a return on investment of the team that maybe a CFO kind of, measure you on, and that's really important. Maybe. And as you become a more mature function, so it changes to be less about that, because that's just a hygiene factor. I believe, like Father Christmas example, I trust you to do that. Now I want you to think about bigger buckets of cost and how we can transform them, or bigger buckets of risk and how we can mitigate them, or bigger opportunities to get involved in. And here at Inmarsat, I started out as Chief Procurement Officer, and then I built onto it commercial contracts, that's sales contracting and a team of paralegals. I built onto that insurance, general insurance, space insurance, because it's commercial. I built onto that prioritization and portfolio management across the company. You can almost create an interesting role for yourself because you've built the trust and deliver. You don't necessarily need to feel restricted just to be a CPO. It can go broader.
If you think about the sort of the varied responsibilities you've got there, so cost savings doesn't really make sense in relation to that wider role. And sometimes this sort of obsession around cost savings can be if procurement is seen as a support function and an overhead, then actually, if you're saving more money than you cost, then you're doing a good job there and you can fly under the radar a little bit. But actually, I think as we become more of a strategic function, then it is more about value. It's about revenue. It's about all these other things we're talking about. So yeah, that's a sort of a switch over the last 5-10 years, I guess.
And we do amazing things in procurement. We shouldn't belittle the amazing things we do together with our stakeholders or together with our suppliers. We should shout about these amazing things, because I often think people in the business don't know of the balanced kind of variety of things we do. Now, of course, there's a time and a place for doing that, and sometimes people get bored if you're always energetic about it. But nevertheless, use that time and a place to the advantage of your team and how that team can develop and grow.
There's a lot of talk at the moment about the fact that we need to 10x procurement. So take it from where it was to something that's an order of magnitude greater. What does 10xing procurement mean to you?
I'll first say 10x doesn't mean the latest fad, which we should forget all the good stuff. I continually get worried about the focus on AI at the moment, because actually we haven't really delivered last year's kind of focus on sustainability. That is a long-term play. You need to think about what you want to achieve from sustainability, put the mechanisms in place, and then drive it forward. It's multi-yeared. So the same would go with kind of risk in previous years, etc. Keep focusing on the things that matter. It just happens we're doing more and more kind of layers of things in procurement. So 10x for me is about inquisitively seeing how we can drive bigger benefits and faster benefits in a balanced way. So re-challenging ourselves. The way we're working at the moment, could it be more efficient? Maybe that's where some AI comes in, which enables faster outcomes. Not necessarily headcount reduction. I think there's too much press about headcount. It's really about getting some of the more mundane tasks done by AI that actually unlocks time for kind of others to do higher value. But, different companies will have a different view. So I think 10x is being more efficient, challenging ourselves, seeing how we can go faster, getting more involved up front so that you can go faster because there's limited surprises, knowing your external market, what's out there. So don't come into the office every day, sit at your desk or sit at home on your laptop, just dealing with projects in a blinkered fashion. Open up your mind, invest some time into reading, learning, meeting people, going to all those things I said before, so that you become a more balanced commercial person. And I think our stakeholders and leaders see that. They see you being more balanced. In a personal level, I've done reviews of departments quite recently at the request of senior people. It has nothing to do with procurement, but it's because I'll bring an objective, swift view to things because I'm trusted as a commercial leader. And okay, so that doesn't happen every day, but it happens regularly enough for me to know that our function is valued and trusted and respected enough to do it. and that we treat things with absolute confidentiality, meaning that we're not going to give anyone any unintended surprises. So I think 10X is a variety of things, but profoundly just thinking differently and challenging yourself, because just because you do it this way today doesn't mean it's right for tomorrow.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I love that. It's like almost like a mindset, isn't it? It's thinking beyond any sort of constraints or approaches that you've had before, and thinking to the future, and thinking in this more sort of commercial sense, and joining up all the dots, because across business there are loads of different things that if we bring them together, we can make a much greater impact. Tim, I've really enjoyed that conversation today. Thanks for joining, and thanks a lot for your time.
Absolutely, anytime. I very much enjoy your podcast. I learn loads from it, so thank you for doing them.
Thank you. Thanks for listening. Do like and share and subscribe to hear the next procurement conversation.